Yo, what is up everyone? Back here with another video. Today we're going to be doing a video on the current metagame. I wanted to do a video kind of touching on kind of where I felt like we were at in terms of the metagame, you know, kind of discussing that with you guys and kind of working with you guys through that. So if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to let me know in the comments. Make sure to let me know your opinions. But yeah, so we're going to be talking about the most recent Limitless tournament. There was another tournament that I will be touching on briefly, but I probably won't be talking about too much. Basically, that tournament, we pretty much saw the same thing of like Swordfish doing well, you know, like those kind of teams. A couple of other teams that did like well, but you know, nothing like too crazy, right? So for the most part, like that tournament pretty much would be the same standard stats as this. Although there is some stuff worth noting, I think, in this, in this tournament that I think is kind of cool to discuss. So we're gonna start by talking about what are the biggest like winners, or like rather the most common teams that are showing up, right? So something that's really interesting is I had mentioned that before the tournament, Yveltal-Zacian was due for a win at some point, and they ended up winning with it, which was kind of funny. But I mean, this tournament pretty much had a lot of Yveltal-Zacian players. Now it's worth noting. I can talk about Kyogrization first, I guess. Like Kyogrization was just kind of like the you know, it's like the standard choice. It's like pretty much doing like 50-50 in terms of like its stats because it's being used so much. If you look, there were a bunch of successful Kyogrization teams. So like here, Kyogrization, Kyogrization, you know, and like we can definitely tell that right now out of all the Kyogrization teams, that for sure the Zapdos versions are doing the best out of like everything, right? Like the Zapdos versions of Kyogrization are here to stay. At the moment, they look like they're the best variation of the team, and they look like the best adjustment, mostly because of how well they match up in the sun. So that makes a lot of sense, right? So that's like worth noting. Something to note with the Zacian Kyogre teams is that this one utilized Venusaur. This one had Ferrothorn. This was the Paul Reese team, actually. And this one had a Moongus, right? So you kind of just see the grass type varies a little bit, and like some of them opt to be a little more offensive with this one running Whimsicott. But for the most part, they're mostly opting towards screens to just take advantage of that. Another thing to note as well, screens wasn't as popular in the first tournament, but now like you can see that screens is a good chunk. So like my team had it, this Kyogre team had it, right? It was on the Xerneas team. There were screens on this team, so like 4 out of the top 8 had screens, right? And like even as you scroll down, you'll still see some Grims pop up. Less so here, but like if you notice, interesting enough, like there aren't as many Grims in the top 16, but all the Grimmsnarls are consolidated within the top cut, so I find that just really interesting. So that's like kind of a cool thing. Then, if you look at the other two teams in the cut, I mean, it was Zacian Yveltal, right? That popped off. And then you have Kyogrization, and then Calyrex-Zacian, Kyogrization, and then Xerneas-Zacian, right? So this kind of just goes to show that Zacian is pretty strong in the metagame. This doesn't necessarily mean that you can't play teams without Zacian, but what it means is that you definitely need to have a lot of respect on your team for it. So, like, the reason why I felt pretty confident opposing Zacians, I was running Will-O-Wisp Rotom, I had Gastrodon, I had Landorus, like, I had more than enough to help myself with, like, Zacian, right? And, like, if you look at a lot of these teams had enough stuff to deal with Zacian, right? And these teams had small variations that kind of made them unique, but for the most part, like these all kind of had good options into it, right? Now going into the Yveltal-Zacian archetype, because now we kind of talked about Swordfish a little bit, right? So this archetype was really interesting. If you notice, literally it kind of got bodied besides like the top 3. Honestly, I mean, I guess you could argue 4, but like besides the top 3, like that's really the ones that like got the wins. So like I did the best with the version I used, right? So Hyde did second best. He had Lapras, right? And then we had Jude in top 16, right? Jude was using Colossal. So these are all different variations of the archetype, right? So this is the Colossal variation. I still don't think Cole's that great. I just think Jude's really good with Colossal. And then we have the Lapras version. I think this version is going to get outdated at some point. I wouldn't see this version being the best for a while. I feel like this version is like the most like consistent out of the bunch, and you can kind of see that by obviously how it performed. I felt like this team was a kind of the best rendition of the archetype that I've played so far, because I was testing this archetype a lot, and I played like a lot of different, like I guess Yveltal-Zacian compositions, and like this has felt the best like by far. So I feel like this is probably going to be along more of the standardization Yveltal builds. Now, one thing of note is that I would 100% think that you need Recover on this team for it to be good. If you look literally on the exact opposite side, there's a same team, right? It's what's it called, the Yveltal-Zacian, but this one is running this one was running Recover, actually. Interesting. This one was running Ally Switch. I think what was essential here was having Will-O-Wisp on my version. That helped a lot. Also, too, my Grimmsnarl was specifically EV'd for one of the trickier matchups, right? I think there was one I saw. I don't remember what it is. It had Protect. There's a Gastrodon with Protect. I know for a fact I saw it. I just don't know where. Let me see if I could actually pull it up here. Because I know that there was another one using Gastrodon, Yveltal, Rotom Heat. Yeah, here. There was another one here, right? And this one had... So I mixed it up. So this one was using Earth Power Landers. First off, I wouldn't recommend that. I think that's really bad. Mostly because then you lose the ability... Like, what you can do with normal, like, timid Life Orb, like, Max Quake off of, like, Special Landers is the same as, like, Physical Landers at -1. Like, Physical Jolly at -1. Interesting note, this one had Protect. I teched Will-O-Wisp on my Rotom mostly because I felt like you needed something to actually disrupt the opponent's physical attackers, so that was kind of useful. And you'll see here they opted for Substitute over Play Rough, right? And like also Protect over Recover. Like these are all things that I think are mistakes on the archetype, because I think that you need Play Rough to cover for Palkia. I think that you need Recover so your Gastrodon can actually stall a little bit better and you have enough damage reduction with the rest of your team to actually do stuff. If you're going to run Protect, I would even suggest running Will-O-Wisp over Nasty Plot, because I found that Nasty Plot was literally only useful in one match, maybe. That being said, though, Nasty Plot's kind of hard to get rid of in some cases. So, like, if I were getting rid of Nasty Plot, I'd be more likely to add Eerie Impulse rather than add Ally Switch or, like, Protect or something, right? But yeah, that's, like, kind of my opinion on it. I like Nasty Plot. I don't particularly mind it too much, like Nasty Plot, Will-O-Wisp. It felt good on this team. But yeah, no, so that's pretty much it for the Yveltal-Zacian archetype. You'll notice that, like, there were 3 different kinds that did well. In my opinion, this one's going to be a bit outdated. Colossal's Colossal, and then, you know, this is probably the more flexible one out of the bunch. But yeah, then we look back at the metagame. The follow-up archetype that did, like, was here was Ice Rider, Calyrex, Kyogre. Now, let me tell you guys something. This is possibly one of the worst archetypes in this format. I thought it was a little bit better than it was, bro. No, this thing's hot garbage, dude. Okay, so let's not count these top 5, right? Let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We remove the top 5 here, right? 0, 3. Okay, so 0, 5, 0, 9, 0, 11, 0, 13. What's it called? 118. 123. So 123 so far, right? Or 223, sorry. 223. And then you go here, and it's, what's it called? 4 and 27. So out of the record of the outside of the top 5, this thing had a 5 and 27 record. Do you know how bad that is? And you know what the worst part is? No one even cut with it. So it's not even like the record improved that much. You know what I mean? Like, this is still awful. You know, like, it literally at best went a little bit above positive, and it still got bodied, right? Like, it's just not good, in my opinion. It's just really not a good team. I really don't think this archetype has, like, much potential whatsoever. Then we have Groudon-Zacian. Groudon-Zacian is interesting. I mean, it had a bit of a losing thing. Like, the highest placing one was 8-3. I think this thing has potential, but, like, for example, like, a couple of the builds I had issues with, I think they were just, like, too cookie cutter to where they did something unique where, like, Kyogre wouldn't be better on the team. So, a big example of this, and this isn't, like, saying that unnecessarily, like, Adi's a bad build or anything, but just specifically this team. What I had issues with when I looked at this team was that it kind of is, like, a team where, like, maybe you'd want Kyogre on it anyways. You know what I mean? Like, for example, if I had Kyogre over Groudon here, and then I put Venusaur over P2, and then maybe messed around with the electric type, like, I literally have, like, a better team, right? And, like, you could obviously argue that for anything, but I think the main reasoning why, this archetype in general can struggle if you don't build it in a certain way is, like, it's mostly honestly just because it has less options than Kyogrization does, like less offensive pressure, right? Because with Groudon, you're forced to set up Sword Dance, right? So you need like a partner besides Venusaur that's really going to be able to benefit off of these two specific partners. That's why I specifically like the version that got top 8 in Victory Road with Rotom Heat, because I felt like with Rotom Heat, you were able to exert pressure versus opposing Sun teams. And one thing I could also see this team struggling with is opposing Sun teams, right? Like that can definitely be an issue as well. That being said, if like I don't think the build was that far off of like what I would imagine a good Groudon-Zacian team to look like. I just think like the Thundurus and the P2 slots were like kind of what held it back, right? Also, too, you need Weather Ball on Venusaur, in my opinion. But even if we look at like the other two, right? Because let's go back, right? And like you'll see that all the losses, I believe. Let's see. So 2 losses were to Swordfish, right? Which you don't really want to be losing. Actually, every single loss was to Swordfish, and like if you're losing to Swordfish, that's definitely not what you want, right? Because like then you're literally just using a matchup that gives you like a suboptimal matchup versus like the common meta team, right? Even if we look at like Crazy Mix, right? Like his losses were to what's it called? Zacian and Kyogre. There was only 1 win over Zacian and Kyogre, right? And like these teams, that's the number one thing that I think they have to adapt for. They have to be able to beat like these Kyogrization teams, you know, because it seems like they really struggle versus that stuff. Also, too, like a loss to Yveltal, that's not too great, you know. What about here? Right? Look over here. The losses were to Zacian and Kyogre. There was a win versus Zacian and Kyogre here. Yeah, but you guys can kind of see what I mean. You know what I mean? Like, you don't really want to be losing to these kind of teams. You need to have a better counterplay for Kyogre teams, I feel like. And that's like what a lot of these teams struggle with. I think that once you find a build for this archetype that works better against the Kyogre-Zacian teams, which is why I specifically brought up Rotom, because Rotom's really good in the Zacian, really good in the Ogre if you're in Sun. That's why I like that variation a bit better, right? Because it kind of gives you a better matchup into the more common teams. Also, Rotom Heat and Groudon also match up better into Yveltal and Zacian as well, right? So it's kind of like a neat thing there. And then we go down to Solgaleo and Kyogre. So this one also had a bit of a losing win rate. The highest placement was Asuya with the team, actually, which is really interesting. That's so interesting. You can kind of see the matchups with it too, right? So it beat Duskmane Necrozma, Shadow Rider. That's really interesting, actually. It consistently beat Shadow Rider, Calyrex-Groudon, and Yveltal-Zacian. Wait, that's not true, because I played one, and I beat it. Okay, this is, like, weird stats. I'm not sure how that works. Anyways, I had played versus a few guys using these kind of teams. They were alright, you know. Let's see what this build is. I feel like it has potential, right? The number one thing holding Solgaleo back, honestly, is just the fact that it has to max immediately, right? Like, the fact that Solgaleo has to max turn 1, like, really sucks, you know what I mean? Like, you don't really want a restricted that's forced to Dynamax to gain value, because then you set yourself behind if you don't get value out of the max, which is very possible in certain situations, you know? Certain teams can capitalize off of, like, do that. So, for example, I had played versus Bread, right? And literally turn 1, he was forced to max Solgaleo. He led Regieleki and Solgaleo into me. And I led Yveltal and Zacian, I believe, right? And all I did was I double swapped my ground types in, and he max quaked into my Zacian, went right into my Landers, and he Electrowebbed. So I got in both my mons for free. He wasted a turn of his max. Next turn, got a yawn on the Solgaleo. Solgaleo was useless for the rest of the game. It couldn't do anything, and it proceeded to be a pretty clean sweep, right? And it just kind of shows you that a lot of these teams just kind of struggle with the fact that Solgaleo has to max early. So you need a better, like, kind of counterplay or, like, better use to deal with that stuff, you know? So for me personally, out of all the archetypes that we've looked at so far, genuinely, this is how I feel, right? We're looking at, like, all the archetypes as a whole. Very solid, bad, solid, but needs changes so it can match up better. I think Rotom Heat is essential on this kind of archetype, right? This can work, but it needs some changes. And then we can go to this, right? I'm just kind of recapping, like, what I think so far from, like, all the archetypes. We saw that the Kyurems kind of, like, were in the 7-4 range. I kind of tweeted about this. I mean, it was kind of a meme, kind of like a real tweet. Literally what I said was, I was like, Kyurem is like, it's a Swiss gatekeeper but a top cut loser. And the reason why I said that was because it always loses in top cut, or it always loses like right before top cut, but it'll always like gatekeep certain people in like Swiss, right? And like you can kind of see that here, you know what I mean? Like Kyurem went 7-4, but it never cut, you know what I mean? Like it never did well enough where like it cut, but it probably destroyed some people because they just didn't have good matchups for it, right? Like if you look versus the wins, right? Like for the most part, like you know, there were a lot of wins versus the Kyogrization teams, which is really interesting actually, because typically you don't see that as much, right? But it just kind of shows you that like if you build this team properly, it can beat Swordfish a lot. But the problem is that it struggles versus other random archetypes that you'd play versus, right? And like you'll see even versus Swordfish, right? Like beat Swordfish 3 times, right? It lost to it twice, right? And it managed to win versus Solgaleo, which is kind of impressive, honestly. Like I had some other losses, you know, so it's like kind of even in that way. But yeah, I don't know. That's just kind of like my opinion on that as a whole. Like it's okay. It might have some potential, but I just feel like it's definitely gonna be worse in top cut and like later rounds of Swiss, in my opinion. Palkia-Zacian. So this one surprisingly had a bit lower usage, even though it just won. I say surprisingly, but like I'm not too surprised. See, this team I think is very good early meta, but I think it's gonna fall off as we continue to progress in the metagame. I even tried to use Palkia in just like some games with like friends and stuff, and like I just don't like how it feels. Like it's strong, but the problem is that it can be like really biased towards offense, kind of like the Solgaleo issue where it really needs a max to get like any value. So that's like kind of a tricky thing about it, right? And like I really think that out of all the builds that I saw, Victor ended up going 7-4. He had like a pretty standard Palkia build, but like I feel like honestly the build that I liked the most out of like all the Palkia teams was Gahaku's the most, which pretty much was like this idea. What I think would have made this team a bit better is if this were like Assault Vest Landorus and then like this was Incineroar, honestly. And that's actually what I was playing with to like test, and like it felt okay enough, you know, but like I just feel like this archetype has like very limited places it can go, you know. But yeah. In terms of the other, what's it called? I'm trying to go back. Hold on. There we go. In terms of the other archetypes from down here, I'm going to do a quick overview of what I think about them. This one has potential. You notice that the ones that did well just kind of had like different partners. You know, this like Regigigas was one of the things that were leveraged. There was also a Thunderous version, you know, Thunderous like Blastoise version. So, you know, there are a couple things you can do there. Calyrex Shadow Rider Ogre is really weird. I feel like it kind of scoops to Yveltal, so honestly I wouldn't really recommend this archetype too much. Then you go down here, Groudon Yveltal. So, from what I heard, because King of Yi had actually like messaged in my chat or something like during the tournament or whatever, and he was like he kind of got unlucky a little bit during his run, and like honestly like his team didn't seem bad into the field. I mean, he even beat Kyurem, right? Like, with this team, he actually beat Kyurem, which is really surprising, right? Like, you wouldn't expect that. But he beat Kyurem, and then he kind of went crazy into, like, a lot of different teams. His only losses really being Yveltal-Zacian, then, what's it called? Swordfish, and then lost to these two next teams, right? And this one's kind of rough for Evil Dawn, I think. I had played versus this in top 8, and, like, if I wasn't using Zacian, I think I would have had so much more trouble with this. But yeah, no, I mean, like, it makes sense, right? Then here, you know, you have the Calyrex and the Zacian team. So, I don't know, it's interesting. I think this archetype still has places it can go. I still like the archetype. I just think that it needs to develop over time and change, right? But you saw that, like, it did okay, right? So I feel like it had some decent potential into the metagame. I'm not going to talk too much about any of the other ones down there. You see that, like, a lot of the random pairs have, like, really poopy win rates. So, like, here, like, Palkia, Solgaleo, like, that's, like, an 18% win rate. Like, that's not good, man. Don't use that, you know? And, like, as you're going down, like, it's just not super phenomenal. And the win rates, remember, don't tell all, because it can be really skewed to where it won't show the actual, it won't show the actual correct stats, because people drop, right? So you don't have as many losses to compare with. So that's kind of like the tricky part there, you know. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it, right? I mean, that's more so what the explanation would be. But hopefully that makes sense to you guys. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. I mean, we can take a quick look at the top 8 just so you guys can kind of see it. But Yeah, I mean, even this, right? Like, you kind of see, like, the teams that came on top mostly had Zacian, right? So I think Zacian is definitely something that needs to be respected in this metagame, especially Zapdos and, like, the other electric types. Like, I mean, every team in the top 8 had an electric type on it. So that's actually worth noting as well. So, yeah, I mean, if you guys have any other, questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the comments. You know, also, too, you can come by my Twitch channel and ask me anything that you'd like. I'm going to be streaming a tournament later tonight, so you guys can check that out if you want as well. But once again, guys, thank you so much for all the support, as always. I incredibly appreciate it, and I will see you guys on the next video. Peace.